Warning, if you're not a fan of language that packs a punch, now's the time to tune out. But if you're ready for some real talk, stick around and enjoy the ride. Okay, so I want to make sure that we have an explanatory comma for our audience. Neurodiversity is a new term for me. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, definitely. So the current terminology is that we have neurotypical brains and neurodiverse brains. I find that a little problematic, right? Because like, what's typical? I don't know who gets to say that, but essentially, right now, the neurodiversity umbrella would hold, people who have autism, people who have ADHD, basically, yeah, people who sort of experience the world maybe differently than others. And so it can include sensory stuff. It can include overstimulation, right? That ADHD piece of like, my executive functioning is gone because I'm so flustered by all the things I can pay attention to. For me as a clinician, I include things like depression and trauma, like PTSD, in people who are neurodiverse, because your brain experiences the world differently if you've been traumatized. And so it's a way to be more inclusive than even just like the autism spectrum is, right? It brings more people into that diversity space.
So, of course, the reason why we're talking about this is because today's conversation is going to be all about invisible identities. And when we're saying invisible identities, we're talking about the kinds of things that you are not going to get information from just from the visual connections that you get from people. So, for some people, that may mean that it is those who, I don't even know how to describe this. I feel like the whole conversation, I just kind of kept using the wrong words to describe things like identities, right? Because it's not something we're dealing with, it's something we are.
Mm-hmm. Although I would argue some of those things are things we deal with, right? Like some of those things make our lives harder than, and it's not because we make it harder, it's because we have bodies or brains that don't fit in the world that it was made for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess it goes both ways, right? Because like for me, I don't want to go straight to dealing with, because I feel like it gives it a negative connotation as though it is a burden. Because even if it is, because we know that some of these situations are, it still is something that we live with. And I hate to sound campy, but it's our gift. It is the way we get to experience the world, right? Yeah. There's definitely going to be some positiveness that comes from our lives because of these experiences. So I guess that's why I have such a hard time like describing an identity and saying, is it something we're dealing with or is it something we're living with? And I guess I can argue it's both, right? So we're talking about gender, LGBT, chronic illness, and of course, neurodiversity. This conversation is with Dr. Faith Harper. And of course, this is somebody who's really close with you. Can you talk a little bit about that for our intro?
Yeah. So Dr. Faith Harper is a fantastic trauma clinician. She's a certified clinical nutritionist. She is a best-selling author and generally just like a badass friend and rebel in the world. And she's been part of my life for a long time. I met her when I was in grad school. And I always sort of joke that like anything that's gone right for me in my career is because Faith told me to do it and I just listened. She's just really good at like seeing things in people and helping you grow those parts of yourself that might be invisible, right, to other people. That's right. But she can see it in you and she encourages those, to grow those areas and to be authentic and to be yourself. And that's why I was really excited that she agreed to talk about this topic with us. Because I think she's really good at finding those gifts.
Yes. And not only is she so good at them, but she makes it easy to talk about these things without there being this expectation for people to be right. Right? You're not worried about saying the wrong thing. There's so much grace and space for you to just kind of talk and we'll all work through it, right? I love her authenticity. But We had a great time. So I hope that you enjoy this.
Yeah.
My name is Tramel D. Jones, and I am a strategic career coach.
I am Bonnie Scott. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Texas.
For women and marginalized communities, work is hard.
Especially at this point in the pandemic and in our lives.
There's such a toxic workplace in most jobs.
Or you're bringing your own trauma history and making decisions from that place.
From the experiences that we're both having individually, now we get to join forces and help the world not have to go through those same pitfalls, right?
We're going to do it with kindness and love for each other and all the women out there doing this hard stuff.
Welcome to the Work and Wellness Podcast.
Bonnie, tell me how you guys met.
Faith got stuck with me when I was in grad school. When I was doing my master's for counseling, she was, I guess, probably working on the PhD then.
Yeah, I think I was still a doc student. So we got stuck with each other.
Doing my baby therapy practicum. I think you were my supervisor there. And so I always really enjoyed your insight and your humor and the way you approach things, which was very different than most people at UTSA approach things. Go Roadrunners, but could be a little bit conservative sometimes. And so when it was time for me to do my associate hours, I looked you up again and I was like, hey, do you want me? And we've just sort of been together ever since. And, I often tell people, I was so lucky, Faith, that you came into my life and you agreed to take me on because I think you saw something in me that a lot of other supervisors would not, right? I am the therapist I am today because you were like, yes, be a feminist, be a disruptor, be a person who is relational. I don't know that anyone else would have seen that in me. And so I often tell people I'm just so thankful that we found each other because I am the practitioner I am today because of you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you doing that continues to give me permission to be equally obnoxious. So we just basically were encouraging each other.
Hey, this is Bonnie, and I want to take a minute to talk to you about my business, which is Mindful Kindness Counseling, LLC. It's a private therapy practice in San Antonio, Texas. It's a huge part of who I am, a huge part of my life. I'm really proud of the work that I do and the way that it reflects my values and supports my community. So I want you to know that my business is there. If you're looking for a therapist, if you're looking for a supervisor, if you're hoping for support or networking, let me know how I can support you because there is plenty of work to go around and I want all of us to be successful. So reach me at BonnieScottLPC@gmail.com.
Talk to me about your journey. How did you get where you are today?
With no consistent plan and a lot of people pushing me and shoving me into roles and me kind of, I always feel tell me how to set up a successful private practice. Oh my God. I don't know. How do you write a successful book? Wasn't planning on me being successful. I don't know. No, I do have to say that that's not a humble brag. I have been very fortunate in that way of just really leaning into things that I was excited about and probably like the two of you saying, this is what the world needs. And so I need to do my best in that regard. And some things hit and some things don't. But if we, I believe if we ask the question, do you want to be happy or do you want to have a life of meaning? If we answer the call, I want to have a life of meaning, we're always going to find our way. And so if it is, what does the world need me to be? And that's where my meaning and my joy lie. And so it has been in, caring for others and using my voice where I can, whether it be as a clinician, as a trainer, as a writer. And so when you're starting to do the training and the writing, you're expanding out those circles and you're expanding out those ripples. And so, and even something like my books, which have done very well, didn't do well because I had a huge publisher that, put out a lot of billboards or whatever. They did well because, a few read it and then pass it on to other people and pass it on to other people and stuff. So there wasn't some kind of clear plan and intent. And I, created like some mission statement for myself and set out to do things. I really just followed what's meaningful. Where can I help? Where am I of service? My father is Choctaw, and so I was raised very much tradition, matrilineal. I always tell people, my daddy didn't raise a lady; he raised a warrior. And so I was always told, most people are very good at taking care of their own family, and I need you to understand that the world is your family. And so that was very much always in the forefront of my mind with anything that I did. But then he also said, okay, that's too many battles. You need to put a few of those back. So also had to be like, okay, I didn't say all of them, honey. Just like, can you pick 3 or 4? Yeah, that looks heavy. But no, I mean, there was very much, we never really had very much money because he was always caring for other people as well. So there was also, that was something that I was raised to value.
I love that. That's amazing. I think it goes back to the thing that draws me to you, which is, again, that authenticity. And I'm constantly telling people, when you go with that, it will lead you to great places. And I don't think that's a common theme that's being spoken, right?
Yeah.
Like, I love what you said about, do you want a life of meaning or do you want to be happy? Well, the crazy part about it is when you go after that authentic life of meaning, where you are making change and standing up for the people you care about, it leads to happiness.
Happiness, yeah. And you may not be like, this is so much fun in that moment, but at the end of your day, you're gonna be like, yeah, that was good. That was a good day. Yeah.
Maybe a year ago, I'm a Audible subscriber, so I'm listening to Audible, and it just so happened your face pops up. One of your books is on Audible, and I was like, oh my God, I get to have her with me. So congratulations on the success of your books. I love how you talk about how, like, you didn't have this very specific plan. I need people to hear that. When I hear that you wrote a book because you knew that it just needed to be written, and it wasn't about, well, let us take a survey. What do the people need right now in the money area? It wasn't that. It was very much like, this is what I feel needs to be said, right?
I need to write the books that I needed that weren't out there, and maybe like a few other people will need them as well. Maybe I'll sell a couple thousand books. I wasn't expecting on 5 million, so shit.
Can we talk about the latest that's happening for you guys as far as publishing? Is there anything new coming out right now?
So the ones for me that are at the printer right now is a book about grief. And I, because I approach grief as another expression of love. And wanted to write about it. And we have so much fear of grief and grief work. And then we want to call it depression and we want to make it clinical, and so I really wanted to write about it. My books are very much about myth busting more than anything else. And I don't like how books simplify and talk down to people. And I think people can grasp complicated information just fine. And so I wanted to talk about those kinds of things. And also, there's been a lot of fluttering around about DSM and, complicated grief and, and all those things. So I talk about all those things. And then I also put out an expanded workbook for Unfuck Your Brain. And so those are the 2 that are out right now. And then the ones that I'm working on, there's an autism fact that I am co-authoring. So my publisher, Bonnie, and our publisher, Joe Beal, is autistic. And I have been co-writing some books in that domain with him from the lived experience perspective and me from the clinical perspective, and also the parent of somebody who is neurodiverse. This one is just a fact of like questions that people had asked, are autistic people funny? And he's like, I think I'm funny, kind of questions. And then I'm also working on a book about eating disorders and body image. And there was a bunch of stuff that I just didn't have room for when I was writing about the mind-body connection, that also needed to be discussed in more depth And they're like, oh, no, like I'm like, there's not room for all of it, because if I'm going to write about it, I need to do it right. Um, so this is a real diagnosis. TikTok cannot diagnose you, those kinds of things. Um, and then how do you really work with those things? Because, Bonnie also does a lot of work in this domain. An eating disorder like anorexia, the only mental health diagnosis that kills more people than that is opioid addiction. So it's very real and very serious, and it's something that has become, social media has sort of taken over and made fun of, and there's a lot of misinformation around, and that's another space that we need to be working in terms of like the industrialized wellness complex and those kinds of things, and even things that I've heard, because I have a postdoc in clinical nutrition, and I like to work in that domain without it being about weight loss.
Yeah,
that was a very long-winded answer, because there's always multiple things going. And then Bonnie and I have some
flex. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
I'm not mad.
Yeah. And then Bonnie and I have some vastly overdue stuff that are incredibly nice editors who are like, this was due like 3 years ago. Do y'all want to work on that? And I'm like,
I'm like,
sure.
Wait, what version where are we? I don't know.
And then they said we had one due, and I was the dumbass that said, actually, there's two. And they said there's two. And I'm like, oh, that.
And do not even mention to me the parenting workbook I was supposed to work on like literally 3 years ago. I'm like, nope, that's buried somewhere. That's dead to me for now.
I suggested we don't do that, so that one's all on you.
No, I'll get to it, but I don't know. No, I think I want to sort of jump off that idea of like TikTok diagnosis and eating disorders and just, mental health in general, to sort of, I'm going to take that as a way to get into our topic for today, which is the idea that like all of us are living with things that affect our lives and affect our work life. And some of those things you can see and some of those things you can't. And so, things like, oh, I am dealing with some complicated grief stuff, or, I am neurodivergent, or maybe I'm not white, but I am light skinned enough that I look white, right? Like bringing that into work, Tramell and I called it sort of like invisible identities, right? So the things that affect you and the way you live your life, but how much of that do you want to bring to work? And so that's what we brought you on today, was to sort of help people navigate, right? Like how much of yourself do you disclose so that it's helpful to you at work without feeling like you're sort of taking advantage of it maybe, or, alienating other people when you talk about those things. So with that being said, can you sort of talk a little bit about that, specifically as we're talking about like women and marginalized communities?
Yeah, and you probably have as well. I've done a lot of ADA accommodation letters for people. And first of all, it's incredibly frustrating, and probably it has to do something with the state that we live in, that we're having to write letters for stuff that's really simple, and people should just be able to ask for and get. Just like they just want something to block the light because the flickering fluorescents give them migraines, and they're not even asking you to change the light. They look on a fucking screen. And I, it was interesting. I had this conversation with my husband's bestie, who is a bigwig supervisor and has some of these invisible identities. And she's like, people would just ask me, I'll do whatever that helps them with their work. And I'm like, and this is why you're an amazing boss. And it's incredibly frustrating that they have to go through all of these hoops to force a company just to do the right thing. And so sometimes we're forced into disclosure, in order just to be able to function at our job. And then there's the other end of that, which I think is kind of what you're leaning into, is sort of this over disclosure. And it's probably a function of my age. I am middle-aged. And so, but also there's this, once we bring something out, we can't take it back. Yeah. So I do have a tendency to, caution against over disclosure. We have definitely, I think all three of us have seen people get punished in terms of over disclosure. And waiting until it's like, this is a place where it makes sense, or like, this is a place where needing to, like, they absolutely need to know, like, I can no longer function in this domain. These lights are causing migraines and I can't do my job effectively, or people are not understanding and they think that I'm rude because of my neurodiversity, or I have this chronic pain condition and I'm no longer needing assistance for walking. I'm using me now, but when I stand up, sometimes my leg doesn't agree with my decision. And so people need to be aware, like, I'm okay. Sometimes my leg may not agree. And so, like, it's okay. Like, nobody needs to call the ambulance, but I'm going to need a second. I'm somebody that has that issue, and I have not needed mobility assistance since I was a kid, but my clients know sometimes I may stand up to walk out with them and my leg disagrees and I may need a second to reorient myself, as an example of that. And also knowing that in, Texas being an at-will employment state, like, we do have, some ADA safeties, but it's also very easy to get just released from your job for something else. So it's in a culture where we tend to overshare on social media. These things can't be taken back, and deleted posts can still be, people can take screenshots. Things still show up on Wayback Machine. I tend to encourage people to be careful in what they share, just for those reasons, and having that kind of more public persona and professional persona. And I'm probably going to have people that very much disagree with me, and that's okay. And I said, maybe I am just being a cranky old at this point. But I've seen how people have been punished for it, and the infighting, and how those things have been used against them in workplaces. I'm sure y'all have too. And so it's just been thinking about, like, what does it serve to share this? If you're sharing it because you're having a horrible day and you want to talk to work bestie, are you sure that's the best place to talk about it?
Yeah.
To talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I am tempted to agree with you, because especially like you were saying, if I write you an ADA letter for whatever, I even sort of struggle with the idea of, like, this is an accommodation. Like, can we just make it comfortable for people to come to work? I don't really understand why we have to ask for these things, but okay, I'll write you a letter, sure. But yeah, just the idea, like, okay, we're going to ask for this, but that's going to open the door to this employer maybe looking at you a little bit more critically, and maybe being like, oh, well, it's fine that you're late because, your chronic pain makes it that you need a few more minutes in the morning. But I don't like that you come back from lunch late. And so that's what I'm going to focus in on now, or whatever, right? Like, sort of asking for what you need as this way to open the door into just more sort of criticism, or people just paying closer attention to you. It's very difficult balance.
I still do a lot of conversations with clients about what their boundaries between what's public and private. That is not something we talk about now with our new generation of professionals that are coming into the office very often. That line of privacy is very blurry right now.
I mean, and I talk about, even with my board associates, is you can tell me things if you want to, and I'm not going to hold whatever you're going through against you, but it's also okay if you don't. If you just say, I've got some shit going on and I'm not going to be at supervision this week. I respect your personal life. And so I always try to set the standard of, you don't need to verbally vomit everything's going on. I trust you to tell me today is not the day for this. And like you said, and people I can talk about whatever I want and however I want, and I can flash it all over Insta. Yes, you can.
You're right.
You can. But guess what? The boomers are still in charge. And if they find it, they may have something to say about it, which is going to negatively impact your ability to work. And, I worked in spaces where I was like, oh, Faith is the one that just doesn't bring any drama to the office. I'm like, because Faith keeps her mouth shut. Yeah. And Faith has drama. Faith got plenty of drama, but you're not hearing about it here because Faith keeps her mouth shut at work. And, so that I'm glad that was my reputation at that place. That was, an important thing to go in, because Faith already knows that she's a loudmouth politically and all those other things. So Faith doesn't need to bring her personal drama as well. I think that, my oldest child is a really good example. They're neurodiverse, and they had worked really hard to get a job. It was just a job like doing stocking at a grocery store, and they were expected to wear all black. And of course, those ADA accommodations you don't get in the interview process. And they were very much in a panic about this because of the sensory input of their clothing. They've always had from the get-go very specific needs about how things feel on their skin. And so they were wondering how to handle it. Do I go ahead and have this conversation? And they live in a state that's more accommodating. But I said, or because they wear flannel. Usually flannel feels more comfortable on their skin. So why don't you just dye your flannel black and then wear the flannel? And so we resolved the problem without having to then discuss that identity at that point, because they were just so excited about this job and didn't want to ruin it out the gate, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and two, the pressure, being the one that feels like you have to be the educator for your employer. They're like, okay, what if I am the first person who has some sensory stuff? And it's important to me that I'm comfortable at work and I have the accommodations I need, but should I be responsible for being the mouthpiece essentially and educating this corporation on something like that? That's also seems unfair.
Yeah. And Bonnie, you've probably done the same thing. When we're doing an accommodation letter, then we have very specific conversations about what's going to be the accommodation that's useful and how much are they willing to share. There's typically more than one diagnoses. Which diagnoses are they willing to share in order to get the accommodation? Especially for somebody who maybe also has a license, go ahead and tell them this, but please don't tell them that part, because that would affect other aspects of my life. I'm intentionally being very vague here. And then I will write the letter, or if it's, it's a form that wherever they work has, I'm saying, are you comfortable with this? I'm thinking these accommodations, this diagnoses, is this okay? And so I make it a process that we do together, because then we can't pull any of this back. This is not going to be part of your HR file. And so for any clinician that's listening, I strongly suggest not just filling out the forms and sending them in, but saying, okay, so if your diagnosis is bipolar disorder and PTSD, and you're wanting a work from home accommodation for a month or whatever, what can you do with those diagnoses if the bipolar disorder might affect their ability to, remain licensed or in that job at all, or something like that, is, to keep those considerations in mind for those of us who are doing ADA accommodations as well.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be removed from the service if you're active duty, as an example.
Exactly. And you do need that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you've been in 20 years, bipolar disorder, bye-bye. Yeah.
You need the time to make the adjustment to understand, okay, if I'm coming into this new position, what is management like? What is the culture of the company? I never suggest to clients that they start out, just spewing. You don't know if the person interviewing you is, just great, happy-go-lucky and exciting, but that might not be the same person you're going to be working under. So give it time, give it space. Fill it out before you decide.
Yeah. And I always fill out, ADA letters or anything related to gender affirming care or any of that. I fill it out with a client so that I can have those conversations, right? What exactly do you want me to ask for? What do we want to say here? What's the diagnosis you're comfortable sharing? Because just asking for accommodations doesn't mean you dump your whole life story on someone. You ask for the accommodation you need for the struggle that you're having, and we can reassess if we need more, right? But, I often will put in those letters too, this is a medical condition this person is dealing with. It does not affect their competency or their vibrancy as a person. They are a whole, cool employee that you were lucky to have, and also they need this little accommodation.
They just need a chair, man. Just give them a chair. Yeah. They just need dragon speak because their handshakes.
Like don't make your retail employees stand up all day. What is the point of that? Let them have a chair. Let them have a break. I mean,
right. If some Karen has a problem with them sitting in a chair, Karen doesn't need to shop there no more. It's okay.
Make Karen stand up all day and get paid minimum wage and see how she
Yeah.
feels at the end of that. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, Faith, can you share with us maybe, you know, I know you just talked about your kid and that example. Do you have any other examples in your personal life of deciding how much you needed to disclose at work, or what has been your sort of your personal experience with that?
My experience was always to not ask for something until I needed it. Not just like, hey, here's my Vita of hot mess. This is what's going on. You know, I've had this illness and it's particularly spiky right now. So this is what I'm needing, or this is what's going on in my life, and I'm really needing some support right now. So I have tended to not waiting until I was at critical mass, but, you know, like knowing my health or knowing, you know, what was going on in my personal life. And of course, this requires being pretty reflexive and recognizing like, oh, I know me, I know what this is. This is a place where I'm gonna need a little bit of assistance, and then going in and having the quiet conversation with, you know, whoever that direct supervisor was. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm needing. And generally speaking, you know, doing it in that way, you never know who's actually going to be amazing and who's not. You know, sometimes the people that you thought were going to be amazing were fucking assholes. And sometimes the people that you expected to be fucking assholes were hugely supportive and wonderful. So, you know, you can't always rely on that. And so if people push back and are unhelpful, that's when you pull out your therapist with that license behind their name to write your accommodation letters or do whatever you need to do. I think other invisible identities, because I am biracial, but you know, past white, at least, you know, by the color card. I mean, I live on the west side now, so people think I'm Mexican, even though my husband's actually Mexican and he speaks Spanish to me and him. But in general, you know, so I also like the invisible identity back pocket card of people not knowing who I am and saying stupid shit and being able to pull that out of my pocket, because there's always that fun of people saying, well, you don't know anything about that, you don't have chronic pain. I'm like, oh, guess what? Or you don't know anything about that, you're a white girl. I'm like, oh, guess what? And then being able to hand people their ass is always fun too.
Yeah, I think up until now we've sort of been talking about this invisible identity as something that like
it's only a problematic thing.
Yes, thank you. That is the word I wanted. But yeah, these other parts of our identity, right? Like maybe I'm bi and that's important to me. Do I bring that out at work? And how much of that do I bring to feel authentic, but not like I'm oversharing? That balance I think is interesting too. Or yeah, like being biracial, or all of those like cool parts of our identity that people can't see by looking at us, but how much of that do you share and how much do you hold?
As you said, being bi or pan or like plurisexual in any way, shape, or form, that may not be something that you share in the workplace, but somebody else is getting shit. So that's where you stand up and you go, hey, me too, fuck off, right? And that's a place where you're actually using, you know, your power. That's a place where my husband and I are both biracial, but both very light. And that's a place where we can step in and be supportive to somebody else who doesn't have the privilege to pass in those situations and can stand up. So sometimes being quiet, like not intentionally, like I'm trying to pass, ha ha ha, but not saying anything then gives us some power in those situations to stand up for others, which is also incredibly helpful. So it's not always a bad thing to have that in our back pocket.
Let's say you've run into something at work. There's a part of your identity that's coming into play that maybe people don't know about you yet. What are some questions you can ask yourself before you disclose those parts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think like, what is it, you know, what is it that this individual needs to know in order for me to do my job? And for me to move about this environment. I mean, that's what we're looking for. Like, I need to be able to do my job. And that's always my go-to question. Is this person and whatever they're doing actually impacting my ability to do my job? Or are they just being a dumbass in the corner? Because if they're just being a dumbass in the corner, here's your crayons, here's your juice box, have at it. And if it's, you know, if something's going on that's impacting my ability to you know, move in this space and do my job, that's when a conversation needs to happen, right? And I have a tendency to really want to be understood, and have had to learn to rein in that over explanation tendency, because I want to make sure that people understand me. So I'm like speaking from my own experience of learning to give less information, not more. What is it that they need to know for me to be able to do my job and move in this space effectively? And to not over explain and not to give too many details. And so I'm a big believer just in general with everything is I tell people, like, have some basic scripts ready to go, and even have basic script responses for when people say dumb things back to you. When people say, oh, well, I heard that most of the people that are actually diagnosed with ADHD aren't really ADHD, that they just need to eat more leafy greens, whatever. Is like, okay, well, be that as it may, you know, be that as it may is one of my favorite script lines, but give people the basic information of, I have an auditory processing issue. I do better having that in writing. So I need to have this in writing. Thank you. Like, so one of the things in my boundaries book, so my boundaries book is as much about communications as it is boundaries. Because boundaries is our everyday expression of consent. And so the next part of it is not, okay, well, here's my boundaries, go on with that. But then how do you then communicate around that? Because what you're saying, even in that situation, is I need this in writing, right? In order for me to process and respond effectively. To do my job and move in this space, I need to be able to process and respond effectively. And in order to do so, I need it in writing. So like I use like BIF statements, brief, informative, friendly, firm. So that's really good in the situation. This is what I need. Thank you so much. You have this option or this option. You can send it to me in an email. You can give it to me in a memo. I don't care if you put it on Slack, but I need it in writing. Thank you. Yeah. And just so you're not over explaining. And I say that as an over explainer myself, and learning to rein that in over the years has been very advantageous for me. I realize that people don't need all that information and they don't care. And I just gave them more things to weaponize later if they, chose to do so. Like they didn't actually understand me better. They weren't listening. The people that want to know more will ask you. The people that love you are going to engage in that, but most people don't actually care. Does that answer the question? Having that process, like, what do I actually need here? How do I communicate that? Brief, informative, friendly, firm, I think is really helpful. And that model comes from dealing with high conflict personalities, but I think it really works with everybody. This is what I'm needing. Thank you.
I love that acronym. Say it again, BIF. So brief, informative.
Brief, informative, friendly,
love
firm.
That.
Right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
So then what happens later is like, well, I told you in that meeting, and you're like, okay, but I do remember my therapist, Bonnie, wrote that ADA accommodation letter. I do have a neurodiversity diagnosis. I do struggle to process auditory information, which is why I need those things in writing. And I'm more than happy to complete that task, but I do need those things in writing. Mm-hmm. So when we have those things in meetings, we can pause and I can write that down and repeat it back to you to make sure I got it. If you want to give that information in writing, or you can send it to me in the fucking Slack like I asked you to,
Yeah.
I love what you said about having scripts on hand. I talk to clients all the time about workplace communication and how if you're getting into hard conversations, it's going to be excruciating if you are not practiced and ready. Mm-hmm. So start practicing these comebacks, or even what it is that you're trying to convey in less mm-hmm. stressful situations with family and friends where the risk is not so high. So that when you do get into these situations where it's like pow and it hits you in the face, you're ready.
Ready, right. Yeah. Experts practice till they get it right. I mean, amateurs practice till they get it right, and experts practice till they can't get it wrong. It needs to be the thing that comes out of your mouth. Okay, when people say blah 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 blah, you say, okay, that's not a true mm-hmm. statement.
Yeah.
Right. So you didn't call nobody a liar. You're not looking to pick a fight. Yeah. You're looking to bring mm-hmm. it down. So okay, that's not a true statement. That actually isn't what I said. I said X, Y, Z, and your voice gets lower, right? Yes. And so they're having to get quieter to hear you. Okay, well, be that as it may, my answer is no. I'm not going to be involved in that. And so like, those kinds of responses, which are incredibly helpful in any situation, especially when a situation becomes high conflict. Right. And when I write, I don't say when you're dealing with a narcissist, when you're dealing with a borderline, because we can all be high conflict.
Yes, we can.
Everybody gets into situations where we're feeling very high conflict and feeling combative. And also, I don't want anyone to pick up my book and go, according to this, Dr. Bates, you're a narcissist.
Because TikTok is already giving them that. They don't.
Yes, that is the current TikTok diagnosis, and only 3% of the population are actually narcissists, have a narcissistic personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, my work wife Brenda's treating all of them, so we're already good.
Hey, podcast listener, this is Bonnie jumping in on this little break in the action to talk to you about advertising opportunities for this season of the podcast. So, my business, Mindful Kindness Counseling, is really proud to support this podcast and these conversations, both with my time, but also financially. And Tramel and I want you to know that we are open to your advertising needs as well. So if you're interested in funding a spot on the podcast, please feel free to contact us at workandwellnesspodcast@gmail.com. Bye.
Faith, this has been great. Can you tell us, how can people continue this conversation with you, whether it's on socials or finding more of your work or hiring you to come and train?
So on social, it's the Intimacy Doctor, and that's DR. It's not doctor spelled out. I am on Insta and Facebook and Twitter. So I have a website, it's the Intimacy Doctor, and also faithgharper.com is like my basic private practice page. Yeah.
And Microcosm Publishing.
I was about to say, where can we get your work? Say it one more time.
Microcosm Publishing, Barnes and Noble. I mean, pretty much any bookstore will carry my stuff. I know Barnes and Noble is sort of consistently sold out.
Well, it's on Audible.
Yes, it's on there. Everything's on Audible, and I did the Audible for Brain and Body. Unfuck Your Brain is it's available in several languages, including Spanish. And another one of my former associates, who is now a professor at St. Edward's, did the translation in-house for that one. So we know it's clinically, and other ones we've sold rights to. And then there's also a kid-friendly version of Unfuck Your Brain. Kids like the F-bomb versions, but if you're like in a school or community health agency where you can't have those, there's a version called Befriend Your Brain. And I did that version with a children's book editor. I didn't want anyone talking down to kids.
Yeah.
That was my big fear of that one, is everyone like, hey, boys and girls, Mr. Brain is your friend. We're going to hug Mr. Brain. And I'm just like, I don't know that anyone would have actually done that, but that was just my fear that, and I also wanted to put in some stuff too about like, under what situations can you agree to your own therapy, and like this is how it works in Texas, and this is how to look up what it might be in your state. And also, even though you can under these circumstances agree to your own therapy, if your parents find out that you're going, they can still request your records. That kind of stuff that kids are always wanting to know, because there's plenty of 16-year-olds like, my parents don't want me to go to therapy, I know I need it. And so some of that information's in there as well.
That's great.
Wow. Thank you so much, Faith, for spending this time with us. It was so great to hang out with you. And
Well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah.